Here comes another factor after the Abraham Accord that if Israel gets directly involved in this region, certainly Gwadar might face a threat which can be mitigated through another potential point, which is the joint development of Giwani port with the involvement of Asia. The strategic agreement between China and Iran also opened the opportunity for Pakistan to jointly develop Chabahar port with China and Iran in order to develop a series of ports in this part and various threats the US Indo-Pacific policy and the Abraham Accords pose. CPEC has the potential to open the western corridor to Iran also in case of naval blockade of the State of Hormuz. Now, recently, another development taking place that is afterwards of the G7 countries conference taken place very recently. China initiated Belt and Road Initiative in 2013 to boost its trade outreach in the world. Now, US launched the project Build Back Better World (B3W). Is the aim to be a partnership between the most developed economies, namely the G7 members, to help narrow the estimated $40 trillion worth of infrastructure needed in the developing world. So these projects are affecting on global politics as India treats Sri Lanka regarding the developing of economies tied with the China through Colombo Port city development over 600 acres space. In further, the geographical location of Sri Lanka due to Indian Ocean is very important and a key trade way to enter the markets of Europe and transit harbor of the ships which move to Europe to Asia. As per think tanks, this is predicting very soon B3W will involve Pakistan and its targets is Pak-China economic ties projects. However, the project seems to be directed as a rival to China Belt and Road Initiative. The B3W initiative appears to be an alternative multilateral funding program to the BR. Yet the developing world is the least of the concern of the optimistic model challenging the Asian giants. Quad Alliance is establishing military aircraft carriers, submarines from the China's ship and fishing the trade route. The aim of Quad is to block the route of State of Malacca, which is narrow route under the scenario. Colombo Port minimize are linking with Tamil Nadu, which is the coastal areas of India and Indian ships, using this route for their trade. So India is considering a security risk from China, which is also legitimate Indian issue, a statement that Sri Lanka should review the mutual maritime security issues and treaties among countries before helping the China. According to India, Chinese outbound investment Sri Lanka risks being stuck in a debt trap and the displacement of its local workers by both legal and illegal Chinese labor. So now India is striving to give tough time to China and wants to improve its image in Quad Alliance and get rid of weak link ties. This situation is also affecting the geopolitical scenario of Asia. The game will more interesting regarding the participation of Pakistan in B3W or Kabul agreement of Turkey and Afghanistan. So let's see what happens in the next few weeks and months. And I do hope that we should organize such seminars and webinars to create more awareness about the threats to Pakistan with the different countries, especially these type of agreements that is against the Pakistan sovereignty as well. And I'm really thankful to General Skandar and team, Jeff, and my media team and my faculty members, particularly to my political and international trade, international departments, COD, Dr. Shoaib. He is very current on these issues and in future we'll do more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the most informative talk. Now I would like for the historian, Mr. Hussain Reza Mirza, for the introduction of breath. Sir. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Abhisar, and I am also grateful to the university team, audit team, and the staff and faculty members that have decided to cooperate with us and work on this thing. I will not take most of time because I would like that people who are going to elaborate on the topic which we have selected, so they should be given more time. I will just tell you what the graph is so that you should know how do we fit into this topic which we have selected. And you can see from the slide that there are 5 countries. GRAP is basically a think tank, strategic economic cooperation policy making think tank, which is basically established by the first time it is here, I would say, in Pakistan, that is established by the business community of Pakistan. Obviously, there are members from the forces, there are members from the diplomatic corps of Pakistan and academia. So this is the basic driving force is the business community about, specifically, obviously. So this was the think tank which was established by them. The countries we are focusing on, as you can see from the slide, is Pakistan, China, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. These are the 5 countries, and that's why obviously. So, why is it called golden ring? If you see on the map in front of you, that these 5 countries they form sort of a ring formation around Central Asia and Afghanistan. So that's why we call it a ring. And why do we call it golden? Because more than 30% of the total world resources, which are on the globe, lies with these 5 countries. And if you include the Central Asia, then you are talking about something like 46% of total world resources which are within this region. So that's why we call it golden and ring as you say. The mission and our objectives I will just go through very quickly. Let me put them on, all of them. So we can save some time on that. Yeah, the mission is to form a new grouping of 5 countries for the strategic economic cooperation among these countries for the development of in future maybe a new bloc. So initially we were calling it for the establishment of new bloc, but our countries, member countries, China, Russia, and Iran, they advised that don't call it bloc at this stage, call it a group of countries, and because bloc means something different in diplomatic language. So that's why we are calling a group of 5 countries. The main objectives are to work as a think tank for the policy making and for advising the government agencies and government departments to make strategic economic cooperation policy, to work as a go-between or as a bridge between the policymakers and the stakeholders. Stakeholders are the business community. Because in the country we have seen a lot that the policymakers do not have any direct link with the stakeholders, the business community. They make policies which are not very much liked by the business community. So this is which we are trying to become. Similarly, we are trying to become a bridge for making contacts, interactions between Pakistani business community and the business communities of these 4 countries. So this is basically the general idea. We are working for the interest of Pakistan. Our main aim is to bring the strategic economic investment of these four countries into Pakistan, which will ensure the economic security of Pakistan. So when we call a strategic economic investment, which means the long-term investment, just like you can call CPEC as a strategic economic investment. Now, whenever these countries are going to do these investments in Pakistan, their influence will be here. Obviously, some other countries, Western countries, the US, they are getting alarmed that why this is happening. So that's why all these accords are taking place, and so we took this topic to discuss today. We'll just quickly, I would say, if you see the economic side, these four countries, China, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, their total, the international trade volume is $5 trillion plus, whereas we do not have any significant input in that. Our share is only 0.67% of the $5 trillion, not even 1%. So we have a large market if you put it from this perspective. We have a very big market right next to it all, and which we are not having. So whenever you have strong trade links, it means your economy is very strong and you have a better link with this country. Now, with a very short period of time since GRAM was established, we have got some very tangible achievements. We managed to convince the government of the four countries, five countries after, and in 2017, the parliamentarian speakers conference was held in Islamabad. All the speakers of from China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and our Pakistani speakers, under his leadership, they all got together and they formed a speakers forum, which is now already there. The first conference was in Pakistan, Islamabad. Then next was one in Iran. Third one was in Ankara. And then the COVID came, so the Chinese and Russian are now, once the COVID is over, they will continue the circle. Second was that we have already done certain agreements and MOUs with different universities, different think tanks across these countries. So we have been able to penetrate politically and business-wise into these countries, so that our interests are watched there and we can do something for Pakistan. So these are the basic, the achievement, which is the main goal while we main graph. So we have been able to achieve in a very short period of time the acceptance of this idea by the four countries. Not only that, and also their involvement, their interest is there. It's not merely acceptance. They are also interested in this idea and they are working with us. So the major initiatives which we have launched, you can see there. One is the shared economic recovery. This is basically post-corona, you can say, because what we call shared economic recovery, which means that all these four countries, five countries, they sit together, they join hands, they develop, commonly they develop each other's economy to come up to a certain level where they can easily work with each other. Then we have a regional energy grid, that is another initiative, which means that the regional countries, they share their the energy sources, oil, gas, electricity, to work, because if you know, if you study the energy diagram of these countries, there are times when something is surplus in one country and the other in other countries is shortage. So we can build network of pipelines and the transmission lines to transmit this energy within the region. The other one is the Joint Advanced Research Complex. That is basically where the education institutions also come in, where our industry comes in. That these countries are, some of them are very advanced in certain things. So we should be collaborating with each other. Whoever is advanced in whatever field, they should be helping each other. Then there is a Joint Media Association. We want to portray, we want to present our narrative, Pakistan's narrative internationally. All of you have seen, we have media person here, Vashata, he knows better than me, that so far we have not been able to present our narrative, Pakistani national narrative to the international world. We have lost 70,000 people. We are still back bad guys, we are terrorists. So we have been fighting the war, but because we cannot present our narrative properly in the international media, so we have, this is an initiative which calls for a joint media association or an organization which will work together, and we will use their media platform to portray, to present our narrative. The other one is the Defense Counter-Terrorism Council, and that is also today what all is happening. And the last thing is the policy framework for CPAC. Here I would like to just quickly tell you one thing. We have been trying this thing for quite some time now. Unfortunately, our bureaucracy is not in favor of, I would say, very much in favor of the CPAC. They have not made a proper policy framework for CPAC, a comprehensive policy framework for CPAC. And we have tried that we will help, we can do it, and still we are not getting through for that. The reason being that if there is a proper comprehensive policy framework, then the CPAC project will go very quickly and can be implemented properly. Without a policy framework, you cannot stop it or you can delay it. So these are our major initiatives, and each initiative will have a lot of things, so that we can discuss later on. I will not waste my time on that, because I want to give the time for to our speakers, distinguished speakers. So one thing which I will leave just, which is this topic. Just I will not speak anything. Dr. Zainab will say on some lot of things, but I will just present this map. So this will tell you a lot of things. So thank you very much, and I will now like our speakers to come up. Thank you. Thank you. Next, I would like to call Chairman Grab, Lieutenant General Secretary. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Esteemed speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. There's always a pleasure coming to a place where one can find young minds and the future of the country available to you to listen to what we who have lived our lives talk about. Coming back to UMP to talk physically, I think after a period of more than a year and a half. We were here last time also connected to similar seminars, and it's always a pleasure to be here. I'm thankful to Dr. Shwed for having spoken so well that it enables me to skip the complete page of what I have to say. Because he's covered all the topic in such a broad and such a deliberate manner that one should not waste time on repeating. I'll just say a few words of what I have, and then move on to the crux of the topic as to how does all this changing geopolitical environment around Pakistan affect Pakistan, and what we should be careful of and what we should be thinking of doing in the near future. As you're all aware that the late 20th century was known as the century of the United States in terms of political, economic, cultural, and military dominance. However, in that century, China also started evolving as an economic and political power. And for the first time that the US understood that and pointed it out very categorically was in 2003, when the Secretary of State announced to the world that the US considered China as a This resulted in the US attempting to restrict the economic, political, and the military growth of China, like it did in the case of Japan in the 1980s, which at that time was called the Plaza Accords. In order to curtail its economic might, it initially was the policy of a pivot to the east, focusing on shifting its military power into the Pacific Ocean and the South China Sea. Later coming up with sanctions based on allegations of intellectual property theft, copyright, and so on. Using the tragedy of Tsunami 2004 as an excuse, it created the Quad. Using the excuse of piracy in the state of Malacca, it expanded its presence into the Straits, lured India to join the Quad, and gave it the area of the Indian Ocean to counter China's presence and make it a member of the Quad, thereby changing the name of the whole region, and instead of calling it the Pacific region, they now call it the Indo-Pacific. And like Dr. Shoaib has mentioned, in June 2021, at the G7 summit, they announced another proposal called the Build Back Better World, this time using COVID-19 as an excuse to counter China's BRI project. Meanwhile, all this is happening in the East. In its effort to dominate the Middle East and North Africa, or the Arab world, the US launched the Arab Spring in 2010. Failing in its Arab Spring strategy, it went on to destroy Iraq under the guise of weapons of mass destruction and Al-Qaeda, Syria against Bashar al-Assad and creating the monster of IS, and of course Libya again in the garb of weapons of mass destruction. Jordan and Egypt, the US had cajoled into treaties with Israel in 79 and 94 respectively. Meanwhile, in the Sahel, or Maghreb, the region in Africa, it created the monster of Al-Qaeda in Maghreb. And now it goes on to open the Accord, the Abraham Accord, a new window of accord. I will not go into its details as it has been adequately covered. Just a few things that I understand. For those of you who have already read the text of the accord, it talks about mutual understanding, coexistence, freedom, cooperation, dialogue, tolerance, ending radicalization and conflict, peace, security, and prosperity in the Middle East and the world. But the question is, does the US actually pursue these ideals in practice across the board? The four countries that have signed these accords today, UAE, basically for better, what do they get in return? Better arms deals. They now have the permission to buy the F-35 fighter jet, economic benefits. Bahrain, very small country, but the purpose of Bahrain signing the accord is basically to signal that Saudi Arabia supports the accord. Sudan, because Sudan will now, as a consequence, be taken off the list of states sponsoring terrorism and given $1.2 billion in aid. Morocco, because the US now acknowledges Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara and arms. What are the implications of these accords? The three implications that I read into the accords are, firstly, openly saying that the Palestinians have to accept the fact that they have to share the land with Israel and there is no other way out. If you recollect, in 2019, NPS had said this categorically in a speech. Secondly, is work with the oil-rich Gulf countries to reduce the Chinese investment in Israel. For those who may not be aware, at the moment, China has fully invested in the port of Haifa, development and maintaining and running it in Israel. And now they are working that some of the Gulf countries with their money should take over this port and get the Chinese out of there. And lastly and not least is stronger cooperation against Iran of the signatory countries and Israel. The question is why? The way I read it is that the US intends to hand over the control of the Middle East region to Israel, primarily through its economic and military strength, and go on to help it realize the plan of Greater Israel as stated in the covenant of the pieces, which is part of the understanding of why these have been termed as the Abraham Accords. Thereby freeing the US to focus itself in the containment of China through the war. There are signs being reported that Bangladesh is likely to be the first signatory of the accord in South Asia. And lastly, allowing Israel the use of facilities of Arab countries in the Persian Gulf for clandestine activities against Iran and the BRI project of the Chinese, which will increase tensions in the region. In this evolving geostrategic environment, Pakistan stands as always in the middle because of its geographic location. And being a staunch ally of China and partner in its flagship BRI project, that is the CPEC. Therefore, it is and will continue to bear the brunt of US direct and indirect pressures in its endeavor to contain China's economic growth and dominance. Therefore, Pakistan has to and must find its place in the evolving world order so that it does not lose its sovereignty and independence. What are the implications of Pakistan? First and foremost would be the effect to dissuade Pakistan from participating in China's BRI or CPEC plan, thus denying China a short access to the Middle East and Africa, to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. Continued pressure to international financial institutions and regimes such as FATF. Pressure would also be applied to the Middle East countries which provide fossil fuels to Pakistan and employing a large workforce which remits precious foreign exchange to the country. Pressures like continued ban of international flights from the Gulf countries and rest of the world, despite the fact that Pakistan at present has the lowest rate of COVID-19 infection in the region. Threat to sanctions in case Pakistan continues to dream about the Iran gas pipeline. I'm sure you're aware that since 47, Pakistan already has been under sanctions 8 times by the US. Pressure to provide a military facility to the US NATO as they abandon Afghanistan. What should be our response? Now that we have aligned ourselves with China, we must continue to do so with more vigor. Under no circumstances, Pakistan should provide a military facility to US NATO as they abandon Afghanistan. This will lead to internal discord and instability and help rise the head of simmering nationalist movements. Better propagate to the social media the positive effects of CPEC, especially in the Balochistan province. Develop industrial zones, parks on the west bank of the river Indus to provide better opportunities to people living there and save the agricultural belt of Punjab to ensure food security in the long term. Invite Gazol or Lure in Russia to benefit from the CPEC infrastructure being developed to build another port on the Arabian Sea and to operate it. Thus, apart from the economic benefits to Pakistan and Russia, it would build stakes of both Russia and China in order to reduce the pressure of the US on Pakistan's sovereignty. Last but not least, use the CPEC route in reverse to enhance Pakistan's connectivity with the Central Asian Republic, China and Russia to gain from the existing trade opportunities to these countries. I thank you all for your patience and will wait to answer any questions. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Janada for her presentation on the topic.
I'm really grateful to UMT, and in particular I'm grateful to Dr. Shrey for giving this opportunity to speak on such an important issue. The distinguished speakers before me, they have covered so many issues in detail, but I would like to continue this in a conceptual framework that what we are talking about, the Indo-Pacific, Quad, and Asia-Pacific. There is a conceptual debate behind this, which actually evolves this concept of Asia-Pacific and it becomes Indo-Pacific. At one side of this concept stands China, adhering to Asia-Pacific, and on the other side stands US, strongly advocating Indo-Pacific. So when we look at Indian Ocean, in history, historically Indian Ocean has been a very important water body among all the five oceans of the world. According to Alfred Mahan, the domination in Asia actually depends on domination in Indian Ocean. And according to US strategist Kaplan, he said that the upcoming rivalry, which is certainly now between US and China, that would be in this region, this particular region. So where do we stand today? After the demise of Soviet Union, we were in the unipolar world, but today are we moving towards a multipolar world? What would be the dynamics, which has certainly taken place, but what would be the upcoming dynamics of this multipolar world? And how does this concept of Asia-Pacific, which was strictly a geographical term, which has now transformed to a strategic, geostrategic and geopolitical term of Indo-Pacific, what implications does this transformation have? The Indian Ocean is certainly very important when we talk about the energy trade routes. 80% of the global oil trade is from Indian Ocean, 40% of the total commercial trade is from Indian Ocean, and the 11 straits of Indian Ocean, the 11 choke points of Indian Ocean are very important, and leading of them all is Strait of Hormuz, certainly, from where 80% of energy trade of the world takes place. Second most important is Strait of Malacca, which hosts about 50% of the global commercial trade. If we look at this map, this gives us a view of Indian Ocean, and very importantly of the Strait of Malacca I will talk about in the context of Malacca dilemma, that US is certainly in position to block Chinese trade in Strait of Malacca. That actually gives rise to this concept of Belt and Road Initiative to diversify Chinese trade routes. When we talk about, conceptually, when we talk about Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific was very geographical term, covering this continent, this part of Asia in Pacific Ocean. And now it has transformed into Indo-Pacific, which covers Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. But the question is that why does China strictly rejects the term Indo-Pacific, and why is US strongly adhering to Indo-Pacific? As President Trump gave this vision of free and open Indo-Pacific in 2017 in Vietnam, and in December 2019, a policy of free and open Indo-Pacific was given. What did it mean? It meant, according to the US national security strategy, that it is a clear competition between the free and repressive worlds. The US national security strategy clearly declared that the competition was now between US and China, and every move they were going to take that would be to contain China. So when we come back to this map of Indo-Pacific, I think it's not clear enough. If you can see, there are different kinds of circles, different colors of circles, and the biggest circle is the Indo-Pacific region recognized by Japan, which covers almost all of Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. Then the red line that specifies the area which US specifies to be Indo-Pacific, and that actually divides Indian Ocean from between this water body along Indian water, and that puts Pakistan on the other side and India on this side, and that actually depicts that what US national security strategy says, that India would be the global power. What the status they want to give to India. When we see in the Indo-Pacific concept of Australia, that is certainly around Australia. And when we see the Indo-Pacific concept of India, that is encircling the areas which are of interest for India, Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal, in particularly, and China. So this concept of Indo-Pacific, that actually leads to the currently more active concept of Quad. I would not go into history yet, that has been adequately covered by the distinguished speakers before. After the latest 10 years, the summit in March 2021 took place between the Quad countries. This is actually the quadrilateral which encircles China, and between India, Australia, US and Japan. So this in particularly gives a framework of Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific, which free and open Indo-Pacific, the concept given by the policy Free and Open Indo-Pacific 2019, it says that there must be freedom of navigation, there must be freedom of sovereignty. They talk about human rights, they talk about media rights, which certainly all hits at China. When we look at the Western Pacific Ocean, two very important areas where there are territorial disputes in South China Sea and East China Sea on the disputing claims of different islands between China, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand. This situation gives a very different strategic, this actually gives a strategic outlook of what's happening in the Pacific Ocean. And beyond this is entirely open Pacific Ocean leading to US. But during last 2 years, US active involvement in these regions clearly shows that what US is planning and executing under the free and open Indo-Pacific policy. In backdrop of all this, Chinese Belt and Road Initiative actually is the concept diversifying Chinese trade routes, the maritime Silk Road, the sea lanes of communication in Indian Ocean, and the belt, the network of roads and the railway network in these countries. And how does it put Pakistan in the most important strategic position? When we say that CPEC is this flagship project of BRI, it actually connects the maritime Silk Road and the belt, the road and railway network. the strategic importance of Gwadar has already been discussed a lot. So this situation actually puts Pakistan on center stage of this entire situation, on this entire situation of the evolving maritime environment in the Indian Ocean, which has a lot of implications for China, Russia, Iran, and Pakistan. Now, when we talk in the context of Pakistan, a very important factor for Pakistan is India, certainly. And when we say that the US national security strategy gave the status of global power to India, which it aspires India to be, clearly it gives the status of net security provider. The concept of net security provider means that it considers India to be the provider of security in this region, an umbrella of security in this region. And through military diplomacy, through capability enhancement of the partner countries, India is very much aggressively pursuing this policy, which it gives in Indian Maritime Security Strategy 2015. And India is actually cherishing this status of net security provider, which puts direct challenges for Pakistan and Pakistan's interests in the region. The next important factor is Abraham Accords, which certainly under the Abraham Accords, as the General Sikandar has spoken about that Sudan, UAE in the Persian Gulf, Sudan, when we talk about Sudan and Morocco, that implicates Gulf of Aden, and these countries, when they have the accords with Israel, that also makes Israel a direct actor in Indian Ocean. And that also puts the interests of Pakistan certainly at stake. And under the guise of Arab-Israel-India nexus. And this slide, certainly, which was left by Hussain Mirza Shah, that if we see, we have heard a lot about piracy in Gulf of Aden and this region. And in order to fight piracy, there were anti-piracy forces, task forces, US-led task forces, 151, 152, 150, and these are actually, if you just these layers of task forces, they actually cover different geographical areas in Indian Ocean. And this clearly shows that these layers of anti-piracy task forces, they implicate the sea lanes of communication in Indian Ocean, which are very important energy trade routes. So, after putting this entire situation in front of you, a very important situation, which also ties Russia in this entire situation, that is Russian vision of international north-south trade corridor, which was envisioned by Russia to join its trade routes to India. If you look at the red line, that shows that trade route which Russia envisions, which is alternative to the other route which is presently functional. And that also has a lot of potential for the connectivity with China, with Pakistan, with Iran. So Russia, it always wanted access to Indian Ocean, and it is one of the largest oil and gas producing countries. The emerging alliance of Quad, the active alliance of Quad, that also puts Russia and China in a situation of emerging alliance, a strong emerging alliance. And this entire situation, what I reckon is that this entire situation ties Pakistan, China, Iran, and Russia in a relationship which is not easy, which will not easy for us to ignore for another decade. That this evolving maritime situation, the geostrategic, the geopolitical, and more importantly, the geo-economic realities of this evolving situation, they put China, Pakistan, Russia, and Iran in a situation where they need to take a joint step forward in order to safeguard their interests. concluded with this map once again. That if we look at this map and if we look at these circles, I see most importantly that when US divides Indian Ocean in these two parts and US takes care of this Indian Ocean with 5th Fleet and 7th Fleet, on one side of it is India, on the other side of it after Abraham Accords now Israel is another actor in this region, and this entire encirclement just not encircles China. It also has encirclement potential for Pakistan, for Iran. Certainly after Abraham Accords, the direct threat would be Iran. And in case of any blockade of Strait of Hormuz, Iranian interests are directly in jeopardy. So, for Pakistan, when we talk about Pakistan, Gwadar is under threat. But if we need to develop more ports, if we talk about that the Jivni port, the development of Jivni port, that can provide us with another opportunity. And if we involve Russia in the construction and development of Jivni port, that can give us a way out. So with this entire picture, which I put forward for you, with these questions that what is the preparation of Pakistan, how much strategically, diplomatically, economically and academically we are prepared to see this situation and to have a way out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, I would like to go Dr. Mujahid Kamran, Chief Advisor, Research and Academic Excellence at GNC. Sir.
Thank you very much. I tried to wriggle out of this. When I got an email from Jail Sahib, it was impolite, but I just did not respond because I thought maybe the not responding I was able to escape. But last night I got a message from Sherwani Sahib, which seemed to indicate that there's no way out and I have to speak. So, the speakers before me have already comprehensively covered so many things. But for the students, I'll start by saying things which are not mentioned in textbooks and which you will not find in the books published by the mainstream publishers. And there's a reason for that, and that has to do with narrative control. The control of narrative is the key to mind control, and mind control is the key to world control. You should always remember that. The head of the department of your political science department, Dr. Pervez, said that he mentioned a book, I think, by Mersheimer on the Israeli lobby, and the book was immediately removed. It is not just that. There are books that Amazon.com has removed from its list. There are publishers. There is a very important publisher who publishes books on the Holocaust. Amazon has banned them last year, and these are called Castle Hill publishers. You go to the internet and find out books by them. So, let me start by saying that the wealthiest families on this planet run the affairs of the globe. For the students, there was a person named Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. He was the briefing officer to the US President from 1955 to 1st January 1964. And he had a desk in the White House, and he coordinated between the CIA and the armed forces for operations of the CIA, clandestine operations which required the help of US armed forces. So he was a man who knew a lot of things. And referring to these families, he says that this power elite has remained superior because it has learned the value of anonymity and secrecy. You do not even know their names. They remain hidden by design. Now, because of internet, some names come forward. The Rothschilds now become known, or the Rockefellers are known, or the Warburgs are known. But still, if you ask someone who owns the U.S. Federal Reserve, not many people will know. Even the American students do not know that the Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank. It is not an entity of the U.S. government. Now, these families have hired intellect. They have set up privately owned, privately funded think tanks. Some of them are well known. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. All these are privately funded think tanks. They are not government think tanks. And through these think tanks, they manage to develop, dictate, direct and control the foreign policy of the US and the UK for the interest of these families, and the goal of these families is a one world government, a tightly run dictatorship controlled by them and with eventually a much reduced global population. They want to own the world, they want to control the world, and they want to run the world. And remember, the policy is first debated in these think tanks. Then some members will write articles in journals like Foreign Affairs. Then these articles are expanded into book form. And these books are then given wide publicity and are reviewed in the Western media. I'll give you two examples. The Clash of Civilization by Huntington, it first appeared as a couple of articles in Foreign Affairs, and then it was expanded into book form. The Grand Chessboard by Brzezinski, the same thing first appeared in the Foreign Affairs. And it must be kept in mind that these books do not reflect the personal opinions of the authors. These are opinions that have been thrashed out and decided as policy in these think tanks. Now, the breakup of the Soviet Union, it has been mentioned, they started talking of a unipolar world, with America as being the preeminent power. And the think tanks were suggesting that there should be no rival power which should be allowed to emerge on the globe to challenge American primacy. Let me quote from Brzezinski. A power, because you saw these maps, the Eurasian land mass is the main thing. Who will control this land mass? The power that dominates Eurasia would control two of the world's three most advanced and economically productive regions. A mere glance at the map also suggests that control over Eurasia would almost automatically entail Africa's subordination, reducing the Western Hemisphere and Oceania geopolitically peripheral to the world's central continent. About 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia, and most of the world's physical wealth is there, both in its enterprises and underneath its soil. There are oil resources, gas resources, precious minerals. Eurasia accounts for 60% of the world's GNP and about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources. The energy resources are important because if you deny your enemy, let's say petrol or oil, the tanks will not run, the planes will not fly, everything will come to a standstill. So that is why you must focus so much attention on the Middle East, because if you can choke oil supply to your adversaries, you will cripple them easily if they do not have sufficient oil resources in their own land. So Brzezinski writes, so America, the chief geopolitical prize is Eurasia. For half a millennium, world affairs were dominated by Eurasian powers and peoples who fought with one another for regional domination and reached out for global power. And this book was published in 1997. So at that time, the Soviet Union was over, Russia was weak, economically weak, militarily weak. China had still not become the major economic power on the globe. So with this background, and now he writes, now a non-Eurasian power is preeminent in Eurasia, and America's global primacy is directly dependent on how long and how effectively its preponderance on the Eurasian continent is sustained. But then, when you think about these things, you also think of possible challenges that may arise, situations that may develop. And of course, again, Brzezinski states, potentially the most dangerous scenario would be a grand coalition of China, Russia, and perhaps Iran. An anti-hegemonic coalition united not by ideology, but by complementary grievances. It would be reminiscent in scale and scope of the challenge once posed by the Sino-Soviet bloc, though this time China would likely be leader and Russia the follower. Avoiding this contingency, however remote it may well be, will require a display of US geostrategic skill on the western, eastern, and southern parameters of Eurasia simultaneously. So this Indo-Pacific region. Now, the Russian Federation has been able to rebuild its muscle. It is not sufficiently emphasized that the Soviet Union has developed highly sophisticated weaponry. It has overtaken the US in certain areas. Hypersonic missiles. It also has developed highly powerful nuclear weapons. It has developed weapons which can destroy countries of the size of France in one go. But this is something which is not mentioned too much publicly, but this is a fact. The Chinese economy is now, in terms of purchasing power parity, it has overtaken the US. And now the US is making efforts to contain China. Although one may ask, what interests has China threatened? China has not posed any military threat, but look at the narrative, What threat is China to America? China is trying to develop economic relations with other countries. American companies, American corporations, the corporate elite of America built China into an economic power by design. They outsourced everything to China, and China was making things, and that is what has enabled China to develop itself. So it is not, and this also happened in the case of Soviet Union, but that is not very well known. Now, the Russian intervention in Syria, for example, prevented the disintegration of Syria. So this means that Russia can flex its muscle when it wants to. And a very interesting statement was made by General Flynn. He said that it was a willful decision of Obama, General Flynn, to send ISIS to Syria to destabilize the Assad regime. Flynn paid a very heavy price for saying this. But what he said underscores the role of the so-called Islamic organizations like Daesh or ISIS, or for that matter, TTP with respect to Pakistan, the kind of role they are chosen to play. Their role is to destabilize and, if possible, dismantle Muslim states with mineral wealth and a power potential. The fate of Iraq and Libya is there for all to see. And for a long time, Malacca has been mentioned repeatedly, USA has been conducting exercises in the Malacca states with India for a long time. It has been going on for more than almost 20 years. I remember in 2001 to 4 I was in Saudi Arabia, and I remember even at that time the US had conducted an exercise in Malacca states jointly with India. So it is not something new. US has been doing this, except now that it has hyped up things a little bit. Now, because of Gwadar and because of this route that goes through Pakistan, if Chinese supplies are threatened in Malacca, there is an alternate route that is available, but then that alternate route which is available will be the target of America, because that represents a sort of lifeline for China. In case a conflict arises, in case a situation develops, and in fact I remember somebody telling me, I can't remember who it was, the Chinese general once said that Pakistan is more important for China than Israel is for America. Because when Israel is there, the Arab states are under pressure, and America can do things using the Israeli pressure and using its own military pressure. Fortunately, China has managed to oust India from Chabahar, because that was a very serious threat to Pakistan. And at least Iran has understood that India was not its friend. Iran should not have given India the foothold in Chabahar, because Pakistan's ties with Saudi Arabia were never directed against Iran. But Iran's ties with India, giving facilities in Chabahar, were directed against Pakistan, and they were a serious threat to Pakistan. US has now bases in Bahrain, it is a base in Qatar. The Qatar Air Base, in fact, is the headquarters of CENTCOM. That base was built with the cost of rupees 1 billion. And these accords that are being mentioned in the headline, they are there not just to free Israel from the pressure of anti-Israel sentiment amongst Muslim countries. They are also there to provide a new foothold to Israel to carry out subversive activities, destabilizing countries, Muslim countries, which do not consider Israel a legitimate country. Pakistan's nuclear program has long been a target of Israel. In fact, John Gunther Dean, who was the US ambassador to India at the time of assassination of General Ziaul, has mentioned in his memoirs that a few weeks before General Ziaul's assassination, he received 2 US congressmen, pro-Israeli congressmen, in the embassy in New Delhi, and they came to him and asked him to assist the Indians and the Israelis in stopping Pakistan's nuclear program. So Pakistan's nuclear program is very, very important for our own survival and the way it is perceived by Israel. In fact, when this ambassador wrote to the State Department that Israel might be involved in the assassination of General Ziaul, he was immediately recalled and sent into forced retirement well before his retirement age. So, some very wonderful maps are shown here. If you look at the Indian Ocean, you find all of the states on the eastern perimeter of Africa, because the Red Sea is an Indian Ocean water inlet into that region, just as the Gulf region is. And that extends from the east coast of Africa right up to Australia. And it is a large water body with unexplored regions, with unexplored, unknown minerals as well. So many things are there. Apart from the strategic importance with regard to the countries which have sea coasts on them. And in fact, I saw a picture of an Indian Air Force aircraft parked next to the Royal Australian Air Force and US Air Force planes in Hawaii during an exercise in 2018. I saw that picture a couple of days ago, in fact. So, India has practically annexed what we used to call occupied government Kashmir, and we have agreed to ceasefire in Kashmir, which we should not have agreed to, giving India a free hand to suppress Kashmiris. It was under US pressure that General Musharraf initiated the process of holding Kashmiri freedom fighters. If they had not done that, the situation in Kashmir would have been different today. So as Kissinger once said, and I will just end within this minute, it is dangerous to be America's enemy, but it is fatal to be America's friend. And we have paid the price all along, and we should have understood a long time ago. Pakistan as a choice to be America's friend and accept Indian hegemony, or be gradually aligned with its enemies. The middle ground is now eroding very fast and could disappear in the coming years as tensions between the big powers mount. So we have to keep that possibility in mind. We have to prepare with that eventuality in mind. And I don't think that we have any choice really, because India is now fully integrated with the Americans in containing China, and we cannot back off. And India will use that cover to build its power and first try to break Pakistan. And unless the Pakistani leadership, both civil and military, takes an ideological stance that Pakistan exists for the protection of the Muslims of the subcontinent, including the Kashmiris and the minorities in India, we will not be able to prepare unless we adopt this angle, this point of view, and this attitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now, the next speaker doesn't require much introduction. He's running his own YouTube channel right now, Baaghi TV. He's a famous journalist, Mr. Mubashir Rahman.
Very, very tough speakers to follow because everything has been told, everything has been said. But what I will do is, I will take this exercise as I would take it on television for everyone to understand. So I'll remove the clutter from all the academic stuff that will be here. कहते हैं कि between intelligence and ignorance, wisdom and folly, there's a very fine division. But if you sit on a wall and speculate, you should see that fools rushing where angels wait to pray. जब ये अभी शुरू नहीं हुआ था सेमिनार, हमारे जल से नजर मुताबिक ये टॉपिक जो है ना बहुत कम, बड़ा ही खौफनाक टॉपिक है. सिंपल टॉपिक होना चाहिए था थ्रेट्स टू पाकिस्तान. एंड मेरे नजदीक पूरी जितनी प्रेजेंटेशंस हुई हैं, they are not about China, they are not about Russia, they are not about anything, they are about Pakistan. And as a Pakistan, it's possible. And जो जब सिकंदर ने बात की थी कि the geopolitical importance of Pakistan को है क्या, मैं आपको एक बात कहूँ कि जो सारी चीजें हैं, they started in 1974. How? If there is an opportunity in the Q&A, I will come and explain that. But let me still take you back. Karachi से शुरू हो. I put this deliberately before anything over here. Because yaad kare, when Hong Kong was going to China from Britain, at that time, every investor in Hong Kong had only one port to come to, and that was Karachi. And Karachi was developing into a major metropolitan area. Hotels bun rahe the, वहाँ पे rent-a-car companies आ रही थी, restaurants बन रहे थे, सब कुछ, all tourist development was being done in Karachi. And suddenly out of nowhere comes NQM. कराची में ethnic killing शुरू हो जाती है, कराची में पत्ताखोरी शुरू हो जाती है, कराची में सब कुछ हो जाता है. All the potential investors of Karachi who were coming from Hong Kong, they simply go over to Dubai. And that was the day that Dubai started changing. You look at Dubai in 1975, and you look at Karachi in 1975, and the comparison is right there in front of you as to what really transpired. मैं आपको बताऊं कि when a child is born, it does not mean the mischief happened the night before. या अभी जो आपने देखी सारा कुछ, ये परसों से नहीं शुरू होती. ये जॉर्ज बुश सीनियर जो है, उसकी स्टेटमेंट याद करें कि उसने उन्होंने कहा था वी हैव टू गो टू अ न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर. हाउ मेनी हैव एक्चुअली थॉट व्हाट इज द न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर? हाउ मेनी ऑफ वी इवन टुडे नो व्हाट इज द न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर? मैं आपको बेट करता हूं मीडिया में भी नहीं पता है. फॉरगेट अबाउट अदर्स. द न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर इज वेरी सिंपल. इट मीन्स कंट्रोलिंग इंफॉर्मेशन, जो अभी डॉक्टर मुजाहिद ने कहा, कंट्रोलिंग इकोनॉमी एंड प्रोटेक्टिंग एनवायरमेंट. This is the new world order. Of information is money, information is power, information is control. Economy, मैंने आगे आप थोड़ा छोटा लिखा है Germany and Japan, and I'll give you an example why I've done that. जब ये Gulf War mention किया था कि why America was going in Iraq, but remember one thing, America was never importing oil from Iraq. America was never importing oil from Kuwait. Germany was, Japan was. And Germany and Japan were upcoming thriving economies of the world at that time, and somehow or the other America had to go and control them, contain them, because Japanese automobiles, German engineering, all of them were clouding and taking over the American domestic market. So by going into Iraq, by going into Kuwait, by controlling the oil that Japan and Germany were dependent upon, they could actually control the economy of the Europe from going out of the control. And environment, of course you protect your environment. You always wage a war away from the homeland. आपकी environment को कुछ ना हो, आपका मुल्क बड़े आराम से, वहाँ पे McDonald's भी खुला है, 7-Eleven भी खुला है, वहाँ पे थीम पार्क भी खुला है, सब कुछ. Iraq is over, obliterated. Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, you name whatever, सारा खत्म. I put this deliberately over there because Zainab was showing this and mentioning this, and I thought it is very important. ये Shia-Sunni conflict क्या? By the way, this is all coming to the US policy. मैं बिल्कुल clear हूँ. ये Shia-Sunni conflict क्या है? ये वहाबी, देवबंदी, बरेलवी की हमारी लड़ाइयाँ किस बात की हो रही हैं? ये ईरान की और सऊदी अरेबिया की ऐसी कौन सी लड़ाई है? There is no end to it. वो लड़ाई. और आप देखें कि पहले दिन से after this struggle started post 74, again coming back to 74, Iran and Yemen were very good allies and started going over there, and Saudi and Yemen became natural adversaries. अब हो क्या? यमन में आज अगर ईरान का कंट्रोल हो जाता है and they can make a base over there. आप जिबूती को आप देख रहे हैं, जिबूती बेस पर there are 7 bases. 7 bases over there, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 7 bases. 3 million की population है, कुछ काम नहीं करते, फिर वहां बैठ के पैसे लेते और पैसे खाते हैं because they have nothing to do. 73 nautical miles का ये क्या है? If there is a base camp over there, if there is a military base over there in Yemen, यहाँ से Saudi oil नहीं गुजर सकता. There is no way it can pass from here. That means it has to go up the other way along the Suez and all that. The oil की price है to the Western world वो 5 times. And certainly the economy of scale do not allow America to give a free leeway to Iran. कि ईरान जो है वो एक प्राइवेट इकोनॉमी हो, ईरान जो है वो हर मुल्क में अपना कंट्रोल कर रहा हो, रीजनल मुल्क में कर रहा हो. Certainly वो अमेरिकन इकोनॉमी है, उसके इंटरेस्ट के खिलाफ हो गया. इसी तरह स्टेट ऑफ होर्मुज वेरी क्विकली, अगर आज इसराइल की वो पैकिंग नहीं दे सही है जो उसने ली है और ईरान से उसकी नहीं बन रही, तो 32 नॉटिकल माइल्स का गैप है. यहाँ पे आतिशबाजी भी अगर होगी तो दुबई का पूरा ट्रेड, अबू धाबी में ऑयल है, दुबई में ऑयल नहीं, शारजा में ऑयल नहीं, अजमान में ऑयल नहीं, कोरफान में ऑयल नहीं. आई मीन इट्स बॉटलनेक्स हो गए. ये जो ट्रेड रूट्स हैं आपके, ये जो सी रूट्स हैं, ये लाइफ लाइन है पूरी प्लैनेट अर्थ की. और आज से नहीं, पहले दिन से अलेक्जेंडर ने नेवीज यूज की, इजिप्शियंस ने नेवी यूज की, रोमन्स ने नेवीज को यूज किया, मर्चेंट शिप को यूज किया, चाइनीज ने किया. सो नाउ दैट इज व्हेन these maps of Zeynep will start making sense to you after this. These are the trading routes of the world जो इंडियन ओशन के अंदर है. और इस वक्त अगर आप प्रेजेंस देखेंगे तो इंडियन ओशन में you can name a military power, a naval power that is there, because this is the gateway to the biggest emerging economy and market of the world, which is the Central Asian Republic. दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा गैस का, ऑयल का, मिनरल्स का जो जखीरा आ रहा है वो सेंट्रल एशियन रिपब्लिक में. आप रेकोडेक इज जस्ट वन एग्जांपल कि आपने देख लिया कि यू हैव नॉट बीन अलाउड टू एक्सप्लोर योर रेकोडेक. वेरी सिंपल, बिकॉज इट थ्रेटन्स द ग्लोबल बैलेंस. मैं एक चीज पहले जो मैंने एक्सप्लेन नहीं की, मैंने लिखा था न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर के साथ कि हाउ डू दे कंट्रोल द इकोनॉमी. We in the third world, we in Pakistan, we love conspiracy theories and actually we don't know, we don't understand that. No major Jewish family, sir, with all due respect, owns a major bank now. No one, not even one. In fact, the biggest bank in the world, Citibank, is owned by Prince Walid bin Talal. You know, that is a Saudi. And other banks are owned by Saudis and Qataris and conglomerates. What happens and how do they control the economy? How do they control everything? Every bank has to be insured by an insurance company. Every insurance company has to be reinsured by a reinsurance company. There are only six reinsurance companies in the world. And every one of them, all of them, are owned by Jews and those Jewish families. So they don't have to be out and exposed in a bank. They don't have to be exposed in an insurance company. They control all the financial management. इसीलिए IMF कहते हैं पाकिस्तान कि जी electricity tariff बनाओ, Pakistan में वो एक छोटा सा another sword and all that, and they start controlling. Unless and until we start understanding how finance and economy works, we will not be able to come out of this. Why is Gavada so important at the end of it? Because China is the biggest manufacturing unit in the world right now. China is the biggest manufacturing hub of the world right now. So it is no rocket science to understand that China needs more oil, more gas than any country of the world. Whatever the resources of energy are there in the world, China needs 38% of those resources. America is not going to let China have them. वो तो साउथ चाइना सी को उसने ब्लॉक किया आके. वो तो अब वियतनाम के अंदर प्रॉब्लम शुरू करा रहा है, वो तो ताइवान के अंदर शुरू करा रहा है, वो तो हांगकांग के अंदर शुरू करा रहा है. तो उसके लिए तो फायरवर्क्स शुरू हो रही है. Where is the alternate energy source for China? That is Central Asian Republic. That is the emerging economy जो मैं आपको बता रहा था पहले. And what is the route for that? Gwadar. Gwadar is the deepest port, hot water port, and that connects China to the rest of the world. एक तो एनर्जी सोर्स आती है, दूसरा चाइना वहां से एक्सपोर्ट करता है. चाइना की ऑलरेडी अंडर प्राइस पाकिस्तान को अगर कुछ समझ नहीं आता कि कुछ ना करे तो हर पाकिस्तानी बैठ के सिर्फ 4 आने राजधानी अगर लेना शुरू हो जाए तो दे सी बैक एंड फीड ऑल ऑफ ये हमारा बजट इतना नहीं है कि बड़े आराम से उसको पूरा कर सकता है. एंड दैट वाज द रीजन बाय द वे कि ये जो आपको मैं बता दूं कि गवादर जो था, गवादर वाज द रीजन व्हाई जनरल मुशर्रफ वाज लेट गो. I tell you what, Americans have given 3 options to General Musharraf. Number 1, boots on the ground. Number 2, strategic distancing from China. And number 3, handing of Gwadar. Musharraf ने उस पर ना कहा, वो चला गया. आज मैं before I came over here, I did a short vlog and a quick vlog before coming here that now Imran Khan's life is in danger because you're refusing the American bases, and Americans don't want air bases. ये मैं आपको बता दूंगा, ये आपको कोई नहीं बता रहा. कोई इंटरेस्ट नहीं आपके एयर बेसेस में अमेरिकन को. अमेरिकन वांट नेवल बेसेस. दे वांट टू स्टॉप द सी रूट्स ऑफ इट. एंड सी रूट किसका रोकेगा? चाइना का रोकेगा, ईरान का रोकेगा, सेंट्रल एशियन रिपब्लिक का रोकेगा, रशिया का रोकेगा. एंड इकोनॉमी मेक्स द वर्ल्ड गो अराउंड. इफ यू कांट अंडरस्टैंड दैट, then very simple. अब Giovanni, Zainab mentioned Giovanni. Why is Giovanni our lifeline? Because any defense expert will tell you one thing that we do not tell on the mainstream media, कि इंडिया पाकिस्तान की अगली वॉर तो हो नहीं. वो अभी होती है, वो 5 साल बाद होती है, 10 साल बाद होती है, ये मुझे नहीं पता, बट होनी कहाँ से शुरू है? रन ऑफ फैक्ट से शुरू होगी. दिस टाइम द main influx of the war will be a naval war between India and Pakistan. More than anything else, क्योंकि उन्होंने आपके गवादर को, आपके सी रिजॉर्ट, हर चीज को उन्होंने आपको ब्लॉक करना है वहां से आपको। और वो सिर्फ एक कंट्री को ब्लॉक करता है जिससे उनका शुरू हो गया लद्दाख के ऊपर, वो सारे देख रहे हैं। जो क्वाड एक्सरसाइजेस में आ गया जापान के साथ, ऑस्ट्रेलिया के साथ, इंडिया एंड यूएस, और बाय द वे दिस क्वाड इज बीइंग इंक्रीज्ड नाउ। क्वाड विल नॉट बी क्वाड एनीमोर इन 2 months, इट विल बी अ ग्रुप ऑफ 12 कंट्रीज। तो ये सारा नेक्सस जो है ये गोल्डन रिंग के ऊपर ये आ रहा है। तो पाकिस्तान मस्ट मेक ऑल्टरनेट एंड अल्टरनेटिव पोर्ट्स एज वेल, ताकि अपनी लाइफलाइन को, चाइना की लाइफलाइन को, रशिया की लाइफलाइन को, टर्की की लाइफलाइन को, ईरान की लाइफलाइन को, इनको ओपन करके रख सके। इन द एंड आई कैन टेल यू वन थिंग, मेरे साथ एक बड़ा प्रॉब्लम था कि मैं ऐसी कौन सी बात बताऊं जो यहाँ पे कोई नहीं बता सकता, स्पेशली डॉक्टर श्वेब के बाद। I personally think the seminar should have concluded after Shweb Pradesh. उस वक्त सिर्फ Q&A होना चाहिए था, because whatever comes now is what he has already elaborately explained in his keynote address. But all I can add over here before I end is that this breath is the lifeline for the region, not just Pakistan. I believe in one thing. अभी Clash of Civilizations का डॉक्टर साहब ने बात की. I believe in that in this day and age, either there is coexistence or there is no existence. But now we need to start evaluating where our coexistence lies. क्या हमारा जिस्म चाइना के साथ, दिल अमेरिका के साथ इसी तरह से कंफ्यूज पॉलिसी चलती रहेगी, or we are going to take decisions now, today, that will impact our generations to come. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to invite Lieutenant General Mohammed Yusuf.
I fully understand it's not easy to be the last speaker of the day, and especially I do not know how you remain awake in this cool environment when it's so 44 degrees outside. But then I posed a similar question at some other place, and the answer was that how do you think you are? How do you assume that you are? Can you hear me? So I don't know. Can I assume that you are? Anyway, I think most of the points have been covered. I just stick to many of those. Can you hear me? वो मुझे याद है कि एक दफा एक प्रोफेसर साहब किसी स्पीकर से हॉल में बैठे हुए थे, तो उन्होंने कहा कि कैन यू हियर मी? तो लाउड केम द क्राई, नो सर। मैंने कहा फिर ठीक है। अच्छा सर, कमिंग बैक टू द अफेयर ऑफ where is slide 3? Okay. I think I'll skip some of these which have been covered, but most of the things have been covered. Let me focus on the dynamics of past Israel relations. Well, there have been a lot of debates here and there, everywhere. There could be Pakistan to recognize, करना चाहिए, नहीं करना चाहिए. A lot of, pros, a lot of cons. The biggest one being, or the bigger one being, कि अगर हम इंडिया के साथ जिसके साथ हम इतनी जंगे लड़ सकते हैं, अगर हमने उनको रेकग्नाइज किया होगा तो फिर why not? But having said that, as of now, our internal dynamics do not support the recognition of Israel. Of course, debate हो जाए, parliament में debate हो जाए, आपको कोई the powers to be कोई बहुत बड़ी कश्मीर सोल्यूशन कोई ऑफर कर दे, इकोनॉमिक एडवांटेजेस ऑफर कर दे, then of course the things can be discussed in parliament and see and taken whatever the people decide. लेकिन जो कुछ मर्जी हो जाएगी, Indian factor in all this will always remain to be a major factor. कश्मीर प्रॉब्लम वन जो हमारा इंडिया के साथ है, उसके अलावा इंडिया हैज द हैबिट ऑफ क्रिएटिंग प्रॉब्लम territory का हो, domination का हो, subjugation का हो, they do create problems. So, in this entire gamut of these relations, I think we need a major factor. Let me just jump on the implications of the Abraham Accord, and I think the next slide will show you the. Okay, this is the slide which just gives you the reaction of the various countries to the Abraham Accord. In this, an oft-discussed Okay, an oft-discussed, I'll say again, an oft-discussed question that Israel keen to expand the relationship or influence in the Arab and Muslim world, when it has full backing of the US of the West, plus she has stamped victories in almost all major campaigns against adversities. Is it security, economy, political, or is it only part of its aggressive fostering and ever-expanding social-political plan? The slide was not written. What does Israel gain by being in UAE, Bahrain, and by implication of Gulf? By implication being in the Gulf. Now these are 3-4 points. These are the crux of my discussion, my presentation, and I think I will not take more than about 70 to 80 seconds on this. One, it dominates the Straits of Hormuz. Enough said on that. It threatens Israel, threatens Iran, Pakistan alone or in combination with India or other world powers. It specifically threatens Gwadar and other coastal regions of Pakistan. Of course, it poses a constant threat to the Chinese seabed and other nearby projects. It also becomes a partner in putting US Western interests not only in the country, even beyond the country. 10 years of now, and subsequently maybe even G12 initiative. Many countries are also talking about it. Now this point is again important. America, Israel. असल में चाइना के सी रूट्स है ना वो ऐसे ही दूर को निकलते हैं बाहर या बीजिंग से या शंघाई से so they first have South Korea there in the 1970s, they come down, they have Indo-China Sea, they come further down, they have the Philippines, then they have Singapore, they come out, then they have Indian Ocean. They are looking at all new, very, very threatening sea routes. So they are looking at these impact projects, and one of the things is, okay, you are trying to bypass Malacca, we create similar dialogues for you in the Straits of Hormuz. At the same time, Israel, in bracket the US also, exploit internal fissures within the Arab Muslim states with reference to whether Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other countries, and support other proxies in the region, and not forget the importance of Arabian question on itself, which is the trade and energy corridor. A very important recent article published by one journalist based in Washington, but published, but came out somewhere in Al Jazeera. He said this Abraham Accord has already failed because of the recent whatever has happened in Palestine just recently. Where is the peace? The peace has all gone. So this is another view which has just come up very recently. Now let me come to the most important thing, that is the possible response option to Pakistan. Some people argue that Abraham Accord has no or very little option for Pakistan, and forcefully deriving implications can be counterproductive. Well, there may be good arguments for that, but I believe that the type of geostrategic environment that we are living in We cannot afford to lower our hearts on any pretext or on any self-perceived notions. We must remain prepared for all eventualities. We must not forget certain aggressive posturing by its strive against us, especially with reference to our military programs. Now, as a military man, we see defensive and offensive response options. Now, defensive response only can never deter an enemy. The only successful response option, which should be duly supported by capability, by enough capability, is the ability to hit back, whether politically, diplomatically, or militarily. Needless to mention the importance of our own economic development, national integration, and internal cohesion, without which it is difficult to have any credible, suitable response option. Ambivalence, of course, at times work, provided you have the capability, demonstrated capability, of which the enemy is also aware. Now, all types of cooperation with regional and like-minded nations is an added advantage by formulating multi-dimensional response options. I'll skip the rest because it has been very well covered by the speakers, that is the importance of CPAC, Dr. Daniel Sikandar, of course. Then development of additional ports along the coastal region has also been amply covered by Mr. Bashar Khan also. Well, I must say that it's not easy to develop port cities. Port cities do not take years to be developed. They take, I think, centuries may be an overstatement, but certainly they take decades to develop besides resources and other things. But then one must have a plan, one must be ready, and one must be prepared that whenever required, these steps can be taken. This is just a matter of time. And the crux of response, economic development and internal cohesion, is the crux of any response. I think I've said too much into little words. I'll leave this to the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite all the